London, May 1940. The city trembles under the drone of distant aircraft, its streets dimmed by blackout curtains and fear. Britain stands alone. The German blitzkrieg has swept across Europe with terrifying speed. Poland, Norway, Denmark, and now France are falling like dominoes. In this moment of unprecedented crisis, one man steps into the center of history. Winston Spencer Churchill. His rise to Prime Minister seems inevitable now, but at the time, it was anything but certain. His enemies within the Conservative Party doubted his judgment. The public remembered Gallipoli. And yet, amid the storm, Churchill's gravelly voice carried a single message of defiance. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. But what the public didn't hear were the private doubts. Within the walls of 10 Downing Street, Churchill began a series of handwritten reflections. Personal entries never meant for official record. These were not the carefully curated speeches or war dispatches. They were intimate confessions of a man aware that one wrong decision could end centuries of empire. One entry dated May 26, 1940, reads simply, "The weight of the world rests upon a shaking table. I am the table." Churchill's early months in office were defined by turmoil. The British Expeditionary Force, BEF, nearly 400,000 men strong, was trapped at Dunkirk. German panzer divisions under General Heinz Guderian had cut off the Allied retreat, pressing them against the French coast. The War Cabinet debated evacuation versus negotiation. Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, urged exploring peace terms through Mussolini. Churchill's pen recorded the moment with almost surgical precision. To yield now would be to sign our own death warrant. But the figures do not comfort me. How long can we fight without France? Behind the rhetoric of defiance lay cold arithmetic. Fuel reserves were dwindling. The Royal Navy was stretched thin. Intelligence reports suggested that German invasion barges were being assembled across the Channel. Churchill's diary notes a recurring phrase, "We must be the anvil, not the sword." In this cryptic line, historians see the measure of his strategy: endure the blows, outlast the storm, and trust that the industrial and moral strength of the British people would prevail. As Operation Dynamo began on May 27th, chaos reigned in Dunkirk. Civilian vessels, trawlers, yachts, lifeboats joined destroyers in the frantic rescue. The Royal Navy's Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Bertram Ramsay, orchestrated the evacuation from underground tunnels beneath Dover Castle. Churchill's war diary reflects his anguish. Every hour brings reports of sinking ships. The air is thick with smoke and prayer. When 338,000 soldiers made it home, Churchill's relief was tempered by realism. Wars are not won by evacuations, he told Parliament. But privately, his writings reveal the emotional toll. We have snatched the living from the jaws of doom, he wrote, but left the dead to history's mercy. Churchill's private notes also hinted at fears closer to home. He questioned the loyalty of certain ministers and the competence of military advisors. In a passage dated June 2nd, he wrote of invisible hands pulling the strings of indecision. Historians have debated whether this was paranoia or foresight, as the intelligence war between British agencies, MI5, SIS, and the newly formed Special Operations Executive was already simmering beneath the surface. The Prime Minister's growing obsession with secrecy would shape British wartime governance for years to come. By the end of June, France had fallen. Hitler's forces marched through Paris. Britain now stood utterly alone, its empire stretched thin from Cairo to Calcutta. The Royal Air Force prepared for the looming aerial assault that would become the Battle of Britain. Yet Churchill's diary, between operational briefings and dispatches, still found room for reflection. "If we fail," he wrote, "then all that we have stood for will pass into silence. Yet I sense the turning of a tide invisible to all but God." Those diaries, never intended for public eyes, capture the raw humanity of leadership under siege. They reveal a man consumed not by glory but by responsibility, not by power, but by the haunting awareness that history was watching. In these pages, Churchill becomes less the unshakable icon of wartime myth and more the man behind it, flawed, fearful, and yet resolute. The final entry from that first summer of war ends abruptly. There will come a day when even victory will demand its own reckoning. The handwriting fades into an unfinished line, as if interrupted mid-thought. Perhaps it was the sound of sirens, perhaps fatigue, or perhaps, as some historians believe, deliberate omission. Whatever the reason, it leaves behind an echo, a reminder that even in moments of triumph, Churchill's greatest battles were not only against Hitler's armies, but against the quiet doubts within his own mind. And as the darkness deepened over London, those hidden diaries would become a mirror of the nation's endurance, its terror, its faith, and its fragile hope that one man's words might yet hold back the tide. June 1940. The last ships return from Dunkirk, battered and smoke-stained, carrying the weary faces of men who have seen the impossible. Britain calls it a miracle, but in Churchill's private notes, it is written differently. Deliverance, yes, but purchased at the cost of despair. The fall of France has left the British Isles alone, staring down the juggernaut of Nazi Germany. The question now is not victory, but survival. In the chaos following Dunkirk, Churchill's war cabinet meets daily in the underground cabinet war rooms, a maze of concrete corridors beneath Whitehall, where air raid sirens echo like distant thunder. Here, amid the smell of stale cigarettes and damp paper, history takes shape. Every meeting, wrote one staffer, felt like the end of the world. Churchill himself often emerged from the map room after midnight, eyes red from whiskey and exhaustion. The diaries from this period reveal his haunting realism. The army is crippled, the continent lost. Our strength lies in resolve alone. Operation Dynamo may have saved hundreds of thousands, but it also exposed a grim truth. Much of Britain's equipment, tanks, artillery, even rifles, had been abandoned on the beaches of France. Intelligence briefings warned that Hitler's invasion plan, Unternehmen Seelöwe, Operation Sea Lion, was already in motion. The Royal Navy struggled to guard the Channel, while the Home Guard drilled with broomsticks in fields. In a diary entry dated June 13th, Churchill scrawled a single word beneath the map of southern England: bait. It's a chilling clue that some historians believe refers to his strategy of deception, drawing the Luftwaffe into British airspace to weaken it before a possible invasion. Meanwhile, deep within the War Office, another secret debate unfolds. Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, insists that Britain should seek peace terms through Mussolini, who still maintains ties to both Berlin and London. Churchill records the exchange with biting precision. Halifax spoke of survival. I spoke of existence. There is a difference. The tension in those rooms is almost palpable. Had the decision gone another way, Britain might have negotiated a truce in the summer of 1940, and the entire course of the war would have changed. While the public heard Churchill's rousing speeches, "We shall fight on the beaches," his private reflections painted a darker picture. On June 20th, he writes, "The people cheer, but I cannot sleep. Every life lost is a stone upon the conscience." The diaries humanize a man often depicted as unflinching. They show his doubts, his guilt, and his fear that defiance might lead to annihilation. By July, the Battle of Britain begins. The skies above southern England fill with the roar of Messerschmitts and Spitfires. Fighter Command, under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, scrambles to defend the island's fragile heart. Each day, Churchill visits RAF, Biggin Hill or Uxbridge to meet the young pilots, boys in their early 20s who would soon be called the few. His diary entry for August 18th, the height of what would later be known as the hardest day, is brief. "Smoke over Kent, their courage humbles me. We live because they die." But another entry from the same week reveals a side of Churchill that historians still debate. He writes of having to choose between ships and souls, a likely reference to his controversial decision not to fully evacuate the Channel Islands before German occupation. Was it a necessary act of wartime realism, or an unspoken sacrifice to buy time? The diary does not say. It ends only with, "History will call it strategy. I shall call it burden." Throughout that summer, Churchill begins to restrict who can access his personal notes. Only his personal secretary, Elizabeth Leighton, and his aide, John Colville, are aware of their existence. Some pages are even written in his own shorthand, a habit from his days as a war correspondent. In September 1940, during the height of the Blitz, Colville records seeing Churchill tear out several diary pages and burn them in an ashtray while the bombs fell outside. He would later write in his own memoir, "He said nothing, only that some truths are too heavy for peace." Those missing pages are still unaccounted for in official archives. By October, Britain's survival begins to look possible. The Luftwaffe has failed to destroy the RAF. Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. Churchill stands before Parliament and delivers one of his most iconic lines. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The nation celebrates, but the diaries betray no joy. His final entry for that month reads, "Victory in the air, but the storm moves to the sea." It's a prophetic line, for even as the bombs fell silent over London, the Battle of the Atlantic was beginning, a new and deadlier struggle that would threaten Britain's lifeline to America. And once again, Churchill's decisions, many made in secret, recorded in half-burned pages, would determine whether freedom survived another year. The ink fades here, the words ending mid-sentence, a clue to the next stage of the war, and to the diary entries that would one day ignite a new controversy about the man who refused to surrender, yet carried within him the silent weight of every life that was lost. Winter, 1941. The fires of the Blitz still smoulder across London, but Churchill's attention is turning westward, to the Atlantic, where the lifeblood of Britain's survival flows. The convoys that carry food, weapons, and hope from the United States now sail under constant threat. German U-boats, lurking beneath the waves, are sinking ships faster than the Royal Navy can protect them. The Battle of Britain has ended in the skies, but a new, quieter war begins beneath the sea. Churchill's diaries from this period are filled with nautical metaphors, signs of his obsession with the Atlantic struggle. One entry from February 1941 reads, "The ocean is our artery. Should it be severed, the heart stops beating." The handwriting is jagged, impatient. Every ship lost meant not just tonnage, but men, merchant sailors, volunteers, the unseen lifeline of a nation. The Prime Minister's frustration grew with every report from the Admiralty. Convoy HX-106 sunk off Greenland. SC-19 lost in the fog near Iceland. By the spring, Britain's imports had fallen by nearly half. The First Sea Lord, Admiral Dudley Pound, pleaded for more destroyers, but the shipyards were already strained. Churchill's diary captures the hopeless arithmetic. We fight the sea, the wolf, and the clock, and all three conspire against us. It was around this time that Churchill began to manipulate another front, the American one. Officially, the United States was still neutral. President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced isolationist pressure from Congress and the public. Yet privately, through a series of secret communications and personal emissaries, Churchill sought to draw America closer to war. "The survival of Britain," he wrote in his diary, "depends not on what we can endure, but on when America decides to act." In June 1941, he authorized the British Security Coordination, BSC, a covert network headquartered in Rockefeller Center, New York, to influence American media, politics, and public opinion. Headed by Canadian spymaster William Stevenson, codenamed Intrepid, the BSC's mission was simple: turn America's neutrality into outrage. The operation included falsified intelligence, planted newspaper stories, and secret cooperation with the FBI and the OSS's predecessors. Churchill's diary entry from July 9th reads cryptically, "Truth alone will not move a nation. Sometimes truth requires a whisper in another man's ear." While Britain fought in the shadows, the Luftwaffe intensified its bombing of industrial cities, Liverpool, Coventry, and Birmingham. The diary's tone grows darker. In one entry, Churchill describes visiting Coventry the morning after a raid. "The cathedral is gone. The city's soul with it. They say we shall rebuild, but I fear something has been forever lost." In these pages, we glimpse not the lion of wartime myth, but a man bearing the unbearable, holding the country together with will alone. Then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changes. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brings the United States into the war. Churchill receives the news at Chequers, his country residence. His diary entry that night is brief, but telling. "Tonight, we have won the war, but it will take years to win it again." Still, even this alliance came at a cost. As Britain leaned on America's growing might, Churchill's private notes reveal an unease with his junior role in the new partnership. "We are now the elder partner in a marriage of necessity," he wrote after meeting Roosevelt in Washington that December. "And as in all marriages, one partner will one day lead. The other will follow." The power dynamics of that partnership would shape not just wartime strategy, but the entire post-war world. Beneath the optimism of Allied unity, lay a deeper secret. Some of Churchill's diary entries from early 1942, later redacted in official archives, describe coded discussions of Atlantic sacrifice. Historians speculate this referred to Churchill's controversial policy of prioritizing convoy protection for North Atlantic routes while accepting heavy losses on secondary routes, particularly those to the Arctic and Mediterranean. In effect, it meant choosing which ships would live and which would die. "Every map is a battlefield," he wrote. "Every red mark, a tomb." One particularly haunting passage, partially recovered from a private collection in 1974, reads, "They will call it strategy. I shall call it gambling with ghosts." The line captures the quiet torment of leadership, a burden rarely acknowledged in public broadcasts or wartime propaganda. By mid-1942, with American support strengthening, the U-boat threat began to wane. Radar, sonar, and long-range patrol aircraft turned the tide of the Atlantic War. Yet the moral cost of those decisions lingered in Churchill's writings. His diaries from the summer of that year reflect a man growing more introspective, more isolated. "I walk between shadows," he noted. "Victory demands silence." As the tide of war began to shift, Churchill's secret writings hinted at a new concern: trust. The Americans were eager to open a second front in Europe. The Soviets were demanding it, but Britain was exhausted, and Churchill knew that premature action could be disastrous. His final entry from 1942 closes on a single, chilling line: "The tide is turning, but toward what shore I do not yet know." In the silence between his words lies the next chapter of his struggle, a war not just for survival, but for control. For as the Allies prepared to take the fight to North Africa, Churchill would face betrayal not from his enemies, but from within his own command. The diaries would soon record a different kind of battle, one fought in whispers, telegrams, and the private fears of a man who could no longer tell where loyalty ended and ambition began. Autumn 1942. The heat of the North African desert becomes the crucible in which the British war effort is tested. After 2 years of bitter retreat, defeat, and indecision, the British Eighth Army faces the Axis forces under the legendary German commander, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. The outcome here will determine not only the fate of the Middle East, but the credibility of Churchill himself. The diaries begin with an ominous tone. In September, Churchill writes, "Our command is fractured, faith is thin. The sands swallow more than our dead." He had recently returned from Cairo, where the mood among officers was brittle and resentful. General Claude Auchinleck, then Commander-in-Chief of Middle East forces, had halted Rommel's advance at the First Battle of El Alamein but refused to pursue. To Churchill, it smelled of hesitation. In his private notes, he scrawled, "Victory delayed is victory denied." Churchill's frustration with Auchinleck was not purely strategic. He feared the war in the desert was sapping British morale. Newspapers back home were asking hard questions. Members of Parliament were whispering about leadership fatigue. And so, in a controversial decision, he replaced Auchinleck with a younger, more aggressive commander, Lieutenant General Bernard Law Montgomery. "I seek a man who believes we can win," Churchill told his aides. In his diary, however, he confided, "Monty's faith is strong, but faith unchecked may yet undo us all." Montgomery's meticulous planning contrasted sharply with Churchill's impatience. The Prime Minister wanted action, a decisive blow to restore confidence. But Monty delayed, gathering strength for what would become the Second Battle of El Alamein. Churchill's diary entries during this time reveal his inner turmoil. "Every day of waiting feels like a year. The desert breeds doubt, and doubt is poison." Finally, on the night of October 23, 1942, Montgomery unleashed his assault. The thunder of 800 British guns shattered the stillness of the desert. Operation Lightfoot began. Infantry from the 9th Australian Division, the 1st South African Division, and the 51st Highland Division pushed forward through minefields and machine gun fire. "The air smelled of oil, cordite, and sand," wrote a soldier from the Royal Sussex Regiment. "We walked into hell under starlight." Churchill followed every development from London, receiving coded telegrams every few hours. His diary captures the intensity of those days. Reports come like heartbeats. "Advance, withdraw, advance again. I light a cigar, and it tastes of dust." When Rommel finally ordered a retreat on November 4th, Churchill wrote the words that would later become famous. "Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat." Yet the diary adds a chilling footnote, never meant for public eyes. "But how many victories before we lose our soul?" Behind the triumph, darker undercurrents swirled. Intelligence reports revealed that ultra-decrypts, the top-secret communications from Bletchley Park, had played a critical role in the victory. Churchill knew that revealing this success would risk exposing Britain's code-breaking advantage. In his diary, he mused, "We have slain the desert fox with invisible weapons, yet secrecy demands silence even in glory." His fascination with secrecy was becoming obsession. He personally approved a directive restricting access to ultra-intelligence even within his own war cabinet. It was the birth of a new layer of classified governance, one that blurred the line between protection and paranoia. Tension also grew between Churchill and his generals. Montgomery's pride was legendary, and his relationship with the Prime Minister soon soured. "He commands as if he alone has seen God's plan," Churchill noted. Some in the War Office believed that Churchill's interference in military matters was reckless. Others thought Monty's arrogance intolerable. In one diary entry dated December 3rd, Churchill vented his frustration. "Our enemies wear grey, but our divisions wear pride." At the same time, political struggles brewed at home. The Labour ministers in Churchill's coalition began to question his judgment. Bombing raids on German cities, particularly Cologne and Hamburg, were increasing in ferocity. The diaries reveal Churchill's private struggle with this new form of warfare. "To strike at their heart is to become like them," he wrote. "Yet mercy cannot win wars." His moral conflict deepened as civilian casualties mounted. When the air staff briefed him on the devastation of Hamburg in 1943's Operation Gomorrah, his only recorded remark was, "It is the price of ending prices." But that night, in the privacy of his study, he wrote, "I wonder who will forgive us." By early 1943, victory in North Africa was assured, but Churchill's inner circle was fracturing. Behind the scenes, internal memoranda began circulating, unsigned but unmistakably critical of the Prime Minister's leadership. Some accused him of micromanaging strategy, others hinted at mental fatigue. "There is talk of fatigue in Whitehall," Churchill noted. "But it is not I who am tired, it is the age we live in." Still, his next diary entry betrays vulnerability. "I feel the sands slipping through my hands." Historians would later call this phase Churchill's shadow period, a time when his public persona of invincibility masked deep private doubt. His diaries, written in pencil rather than ink during these months, suggest an almost deliberate impermanence, as if he knew that these words might one day need to be erased. In one of the final entries before he left for the Casablanca conference with Roosevelt in January 1943, Churchill wrote, "The war turns in our favour, yet I cannot shake the feeling that something has been lost, not in land, nor in men, but in meaning." The entry ends abruptly, mid-sentence, with the words, "Victory demands." And then nothing. Whether those pages were lost, censored, or destroyed remains unknown. But from that unfinished line emerges the central question that would haunt the next phase of his leadership. What does victory cost, and who pays its price? Spring 1944. The war has entered its most critical phase. For nearly 5 years, Churchill has carried the weight of empire, alliance, and survival on his shoulders. But now, as Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, approaches, his diaries grow sparse and fragmented. The words no longer flow as speeches do. They come in bursts, as if written under strain. "The tides of history rise," he notes in April, "and I cannot see the shore." The months leading up to D-Day were defined by secrecy unlike anything before. The deception campaign, Operation Bodyguard, was so intricate that even senior officers were kept in the dark. Phantom armies were created, false radio traffic filled the airwaves, and inflatable tanks dotted the English countryside. General Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, coordinated with British intelligence to convince the Germans that the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. Churchill's diary captures both awe and anxiety. "We deceived the enemy and perhaps ourselves. I wonder which will hurt more." But beneath the operational brilliance lay a deep moral unease. Churchill's private writings reveal sleepless nights haunted by the scale of what was coming. "I am sending thousands of young men into the jaws of steel," he confides in May 1944. "History will call it necessary. I call it dreadful." These are not the words of the roaring orator, but of a man staring into the abyss of consequence. In another entry, partially burned at the edges, he adds, "There will be no glory in this, only duty fulfilled. And duty is a bitter master." As the invasion drew near, Churchill's fear of failure bordered on obsession. He recalled the carnage of Gallipoli 3 decades earlier, when his strategic gamble had ended in catastrophe. "The sea remembers," he wrote on June 3rd. "I pray it forgives." He asked to accompany the invasion fleet personally, an idea vehemently opposed by his generals and King George. His diary records the moment he relented. A prime minister may not drown while the tide of war turns. Then, on June 6, 1944, D-Day, the long-awaited storm broke. At dawn, more than 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy under the roar of naval guns and the shadow of paratroopers descending through flak-lit skies. Reports filtered into the war rooms in London through the night. Churchill paced the concrete floors, a cigar clenched tight between his teeth, listening to the teleprinter clatter with each coded message. His diary entry that day was brief. "The die is cast. May God be with them all." The landing succeeded, but at terrible cost. Nearly 10,000 Allied casualties in the first 24 hours. Entire companies were wiped out on Omaha Beach. Churchill's diary reflects both pride and torment. "We have crossed back into Europe, yet I feel no triumph. Each telegram of the fallen arrives like a wound." His secretary, Elizabeth Leighton, later recalled that Churchill wept openly when reading casualty reports. "He seemed," she wrote, "a man both victorious and bereaved." As the Allies advanced through France, another moral dilemma weighed on him: the bombing of German cities. Operation Thunderclap and the bombing of Dresden in February 1945 would later become symbols of controversy. Churchill had once endorsed the campaign as a means to hasten the end of the war, but his private writings tell a different story. In January 1945 he wrote, "We have the power to burn cities as Rome never dreamed. But must civilization defend itself by ceasing to be civilized?" When Dresden was reduced to ashes, he recorded no immediate reaction. A week later, only this: "Fire has consumed both the wicked and the good. May God forgive us all." Historians have long debated whether these diary fragments represent guilt, reflection, or self-preservation. Some suggest Churchill feared that future generations would question not his courage, but his conscience. The original documents were reportedly edited by government archivists before publication of his memoirs in the 1950s. Entire pages from late 1944 and early 1945 remain missing, removed, redacted, or destroyed. John Colville, one of Churchill's aides, once hinted in a private letter that certain truths were consigned to the flame by his own hand. The surviving pages reveal one last thread of anxiety: his awareness of what would follow victory. As the Allies pushed into Germany and Soviet troops closed in from the east, Churchill's thoughts turned to the post-war world. "We have slain the monster," he wrote in March 1945. "But the shadow it cast may outlive us all." His entries from this time show increasing concern about Stalin and the future of Eastern Europe. "I fear we trade one tyranny for another," he notes. "Our ideals may yet be betrayed by our allies." The tone darkens as the war nears its end. "I see in the ashes of Dresden the smoke of our own future," he writes. "Power and mercy cannot dwell together forever." These words, written just weeks before Germany's surrender, feel less like prophecy and more like confession. It is here, too, that the diaries begin to disintegrate. Pages torn, sentences incomplete, ink smeared by what some believe were tears. One final note, dated May 8, 1945, V-Day, reads simply, "This is the day they will cheer me, and the day I shall begin to mourn." After this, the entries stop for nearly a month. When they resume, the tone is subdued, almost hollow. "Victory," Churchill writes, "has a silence of its own." But the true mystery lies not in what was written, but what was erased. Several entries from this period were later discovered in private collections, recovered from burned fragments found among his estate papers. Among them, a chilling line survives: "We hid much in those years, our doubts, our mistakes, and our mercy. the record will never be whole. And indeed, it never was. The missing pages, those that vanished between late 1944 and 1945, remain one of the great unanswered questions of Churchill's legacy. Were they destroyed to protect his reputation, to conceal state secrets, or perhaps to bury the unbearable weight of moral compromise? Whatever the reason, their absence lingers like smoke after fire. Proof that even the greatest victories carry shadows history cannot fully illuminate. London, 1946. The war is over, but peace brings no rest. Churchill, now out of office after an unexpected election defeat, retreats to Chartwell, his country home in Kent. The house smells of cigars, brandy and paint. His brushes now replace his briefings. Yet, even in retirement, he cannot escape the ghosts of the war he helped to win. The diaries, once urgent and meticulous, resume, but now with a tone of melancholy reflection. We fought the enemy, he writes, but never ourselves. That, perhaps, was the greater war. In the aftermath of victory, fragments of his private writings begin to surface in the most unlikely of places. An archivist at the War Office finds an unmarked envelope containing 4 handwritten pages dated July 1942. A collector in Ottawa acquires a single sheet bearing Churchill's initials, marked for eyes only. The contents, brief, cryptic, and sometimes contradictory, suggest that parts of his personal record had been deliberately scattered or hidden. History, he once wrote, is written by the victors, but guarded by the survivors. What those fragments reveal is both fascinating and unsettling. In one, Churchill laments the erosion of trust among the Allies near the war's end. The Russians take Berlin, and with it, the heart of Europe. We have defeated tyranny only to hand it new names. In another, he admits to feeling haunted by the shadow of Dresden. These pages show a man wrestling not with triumph, but with consequence, a private voice of guilt that history would never hear. As the Cold War begins to take shape, Churchill's tone turns prophetic. In his diary from March 1946, he writes of an iron curtain descending across the continent, the same phrase he will use publicly days later in his famous speech at Fulton, Missouri. But in the diary version, a line was crossed out before publication. We built the wall with our own hands. It suggests that Churchill, perhaps more than any other Allied leader, understood that the seeds of post-war division had been planted long before the peace. Over time, the diaries become more fragmented. Some entries are little more than phrases. Eden doubts me. The Americans listen less. My dreams are full of fire. Others are written in code or shorthand. Several pages are missing entirely, believed to have been removed by secretaries during the compilation of his official memoirs. The Second World War. When the memoirs are published between 1948 and 1954, they are heralded as masterpieces. But those who knew Churchill intimately whisper that they are incomplete. He wrote to posterity, said his private secretary John Colville. But the man who bled on those pages was edited out. One of the most mysterious discoveries comes in 1962, a year before Churchill's final stroke. A former intelligence officer claims to have found a small black notebook, water-stained and unsigned, hidden within Churchill's papers at Chartwell. Inside were only 2 entries. The first, dated April 1945, reads, "I have seen the dawn of peace and the dusk of empire." The second, dated simply midnight, reads, "I no longer know if we won." The notebook vanished before historians could verify it. Some believe it was reclaimed by government archivists, others that it was destroyed by the family to protect his legacy. Its existence remains unproven, its authenticity unconfirmed, but its words, whether true or apocryphal, echo the unease that defined Churchill's later years. As Churchill's health declined, he continued to revise and censor his wartime papers. His daughter Mary later recalled watching him burn old notes in the fireplace, staring into the flames as if erasing memories. He said it was better that some things die in silence, she remembered. In the last dated diary entry from December 1954, he writes, I have written enough to fill libraries, and yet left untold the only story that matters, the weight of choosing who must live and who must die. The final page of the diaries, preserved in the Churchill Archives Centre at Cambridge, carries no date. It contains only one line. History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. But below it, faintly scratched into the paper, as if by hesitation rather than ink, are the words, "But truth may not." That unfinished inscription has become the center of speculation for historians and biographers alike. Was it a last act of confession, a warning, or simply the reflection of a man who had seen too much, done too much, and understood the unbearable price of victory? Today, more than 75 years later, the hidden diaries of Churchill remain both a tantalizing mystery and a mirror of wartime conscience. Their fragments, letters, pages, burned scraps of paper, tell not of military campaigns or speeches, but of the private battle of a leader torn between necessity and morality. They challenge the image of Churchill as the unyielding bulldog and instead reveal something more human. A man burdened by the cost of survival, haunted by the ghosts of the decisions that shaped the modern world. In the end, his legacy stands between myth and truth. The myth is carved in bronze and marble, his speech is immortalized in schoolbooks and documentaries. But the truth, perhaps, still lies locked within those missing pages, sealed by history and silence alike. They remind us that leadership in war is not the pursuit of glory, but the endurance of guilt. The diaries, hidden or destroyed, continue to whisper across the decades. And in that whisper lies the final enigma of Winston Churchill. Not the man who saved the world, but the man who carried its conscience.